my video streaming.
Yeah, turn. Hello, everybody. Are we good? Come on, Morley. Hello, folks. Thank you for coming. We've got a wonderful event tonight. For those of you who are NDN fans, we don't do that many evening events, so it's neat to be here when we can have adult beverages as part of the offering. But thank you all for coming. I'm Simon Rosenberg. It's really, there are events that we do out of obligation, and then there are those that we do out of passion and affirmation, perhaps. And this is one of those events that's just pure fun for us here at NDN. We have one of the book launch parties for our very dear friends, Morley and Mike, who have now written their, hey Dave, how are you? Their third book. And I don't know if, guys, it's a digital book. I don't like the term ebook because it makes it feel small and little and pejorative. I feel like it should be digital.
Pages.
Yeah, digital. It's a long essay, a long Brownstein essay, perhaps. Right. But so what we're going to do is we're going to hear from Morley and Mike, and they're going to deliver a PowerPoint presentation, and then Ron Brownstein, our dear friend, is going to lead us all in a conversation about the book and take some of your questions. And I just want to open up with a few thoughts just to set the context here. First of all, there are people in this room, it's funny, who I knew in my earliest days in politics, in part because I had either the great fortune or the bad luck to work in Michigan in the late 1980s and early 1990s. I was there in both the Dukakis and Clinton presidential campaigns. And the part of the work that we've done here, starting over a decade ago, was to really try to come to a better understanding of how the country was changing. And that NDN, which was a political action committee and in 2005 became a think tank and advocacy organization, the premise of this organization is that there's a new politics being born in America. It's being driven by three big changes: that we've changing demography, which is birthing a whole new American people; that media and technology was changing the way that we organize and govern and do just about everything else in our lives; and that also the governing challenges that we faced in the 21st century were fundamentally different than they were in the 20th, in part driven by the great changes in globalization. And it's in these three areas that we've worked, and I'd like to believe we're pioneers in many ways in some of the thinking. We did the first series of events of any organization in Washington about the role that the internet was going to play in politics, going all the way back to 2003 with Joe Trippi and the Dean crew, right? In 2002, we did the first poll of Latinos ever done by a center-left group that was released to the public. It's hard to believe, right, that it was 11 years ago that the first poll, the AFL-CIO, for the geeky historians here on this stuff, the AFL-CIO had done a poll of Latinos. Steve Rosenthal had done one in 2001, but they never released it. So when we released our poll in 2002, it was the first publicly released poll by a quasi, political. We're a C4, so I have to be a little bit careful about what we all are these days. But
doesn't matter. IRS can't tell the difference.
Yeah, we'll tell you. Yeah, we always like to work with the FEC in those days, right? But we did the first poll in 2002. NDN also did the first major Spanish language media campaign that was ever done by a center-left group, and in 2004. We spent $6 million in 4 states developing what was the first really comprehensive 8-month-long Spanish language media campaign. So we put we were instrumental in helping put the internet in politics, and it seems so quaint now, right, to think about it. And then we also were very involved in sort of helping socialize the idea that there was this profound demographic change coming in American politics. But the work that we did really took off, I think, when we started collaborating with Morley and Mike in late 2005, I think, and you guys wrote your first major paper for us in 2006, where they took this thing called the youth vote and gave it a generational slant. And I think that for those of you who've worked in politics, you know that when you talked about the youth vote, you were always talking about the kids' table, right? It was always something that was secondary and unimportant, the way that in many ways Latino voters were, right? Sort of pejorative terms like drop-off voters, right, were used oftentimes about these groups. They dropped off because nobody spent any money on them and they didn't hear from anybody. But in 2006, we, Morley, Mike, and NDN, introduced the word millennial to American politics, right? There had never really been anything, that word, which Mike had helped lead the practice at one of the most remarkable market research firms in the country, and had led the millennial practice. He took a lot of the research and thinking and brought it in to American politics through the paper we released in 2006. And that, I think, was critical because Rui Teixeira has written this famous book that's gotten a lot of attention, which mentioned the whole Latino thing sort of, but it was a peripheral part of his book. But what Rui didn't write about, and what Rui didn't get in the emerging Democratic majority, was the stuff that Morley and Mike got in 2006. They helped take Rui's excellent analysis and bring it to another level. And in fact, Rui was so intrigued by what we were doing that he was a fellow here in 2007 to work entirely on learning about the millennial vote and actually published some stuff while he was here in 2007. In 2007 also, in part inspired by the work that they had done, and also Tom Schaller, a friend of mine and a guy who I respect greatly, who'd written a book called Whistling Past Dixie, which I think was one of the most influential books that nobody's ever heard of in recent years. NDN, we wrote an article for Mother Jones that discussed what Ron Brownstein now calls the coalition of the ascendant. And I would argue that that article is the first time that full, blown out idea that there was a whole new governing majority coalition for the Democrats ready and available to them if they pursued a different kind of politics. This is pre-Obama winning the nomination in 2008, that article was, I think, in retrospect, a landmark article, borrowing heavily from the research that they had done. And so what I would like to believe is that, the whole thing about think tanks, our job is to, in the division of labor in an ideological movement, our job is to get ahead, right? We're not the politicians drinking water from a fire hose every day, or poor folks in the administration like Jay Carney today, taking the incoming, right? We have the luxury of getting ahead. And what I wanted to reflect on today.
We have a lovely chair for you up front.
Hey, Denise, you can come up. Hey, Denise. What I just want to reflect on is just how consequential I think this work is done. And when I go back and look at my political career, and I've done a lot of interesting things in politics, this stuff, right, that we're going to talk about tonight, I think is the stuff that's going to have the longest lasting impact. We argued in 2007 that, as their book was coming out, that this was the beginning of a 40 or 50 year run for center-left politics, if the center-left can realize the opportunity. And I think this is now all stuff that is commonly known. It's baked in the cake. It's conventional wisdom. It certainly wasn't when their first book came out. And look, we were ridiculed. I mean, there is a Time magazine profile of me by Joe Klein in 2004 where somebody I used to work for and who I admire makes fun of me in the piece for hanging out with all these Latinos, right? And why was I doing identity politics instead of doing the proper kind of politics, which is speaking to the broad middle class. So I think that this organization has really made a huge contribution to the understanding of not just partisan politics, but just where America's going in the 21st century, and hopefully that we can build a better politics around that. And so here we are again, gentlemen, third book. The best one yet.
Oh, obviously.
Because it's also shorter than the other ones.
Yeah. And it's only about politics. You don't have to wait for anything else.
And I just want to welcome Morley and Mike back and just say how much I have enjoyed the collaboration, how much I have learned from them. They're aware that I was always a little skeptical on this stuff. and I'm certainly a convert now, and I just want to end by saying just how proud I am that they've stuck with it. I mean, this stuff we were a little bit ahead of the curve here, and now that the millennial thing is hot and cool, and everybody's trying to get a little bit more about it. I just want to say one thing about Ron Brownstein before I bring them up, is that the reason we wanted Ron to come tonight is there is no journalist in American politics who understands this stuff more than Ron Brownstein. He has done his not only has he done a good job at giving things names, the blue wall and all the things that he's done, but the charts in National Journal are just awesome, right? The graphics, and he's really brought to life things that, through a magazine, frankly, that would be very hard to do otherwise. And I think, I have sent his articles around more in the last 10 years than any other journalist in American politics, and it just is a great, and he's a baseball nut, which is fun for me. But I just want to thank Ron for being here, and I really look forward to the conversation. Morley and Mike, you guys want to take it away?
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Simon.
everybody.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it.
There's a chair up here for you if you care to sit down.
Is there a clicker here? Yes. Oh, thank you.
Well, you already clicked past the opening slide, so
Well, yeah, but that was,
just blew the book. There we go.
okay. So that's the book. You've seen that. Well, the 3 years ago, Morley and I.
Mike, you want to stand up there? There you go.
3 years ago, Morley and I spoke in this very room about this subject, about the new coalition that is based on American demographics. It's not our hopes or our beliefs or anything of the sort, but it is actually based on real numbers, because America is a dynamic country. It is a constantly changing country. It's been ever since the creation of the Republic, maybe before, all these years ago. So we have a new America that is beginning to be shaped by the millennial generation. The millennial generation we define are people who were born from 1982 to 2003. And the millennials embody many of the other changes that occur. Obviously, they're a new emerging young generation, 95 million on the largest generation in American history. They're also ethnically diverse, the most diverse generation to date, although their younger brothers and sisters will even be more diverse than the millennials are. They are tolerant. They're all those things that are really shaping the new America, that are shaping the politics and the elections of the new America. So the country, again, is more ethnically diverse. We are on the way to becoming a majority-minority nation for the first time in American history. Millennials are 40% non-white, but the very youngest millennials are about half the members are non-white and half are white. It's a better educated generation. The country is better educated, and millennials are driving that. For the first time in history, we are moving toward a situation where the typical American will actually have some post-high school, maybe even college graduates, rather than high school being the end of one's education. A much smaller manual labor force than any time in American history, particularly among whites, but again, this is a huge change in the American society. So we have this very large change in America. Millennials are driving this. African Americans that are forming the core of this new majority Democratic coalition. Latinos, as Simon mentioned, Hispanics, women, particularly single women, young single women, but women in general are becoming a part of that. The Northeast and the West are heavily Democratic areas, and obviously areas of some growth in this country, and highly educated people. Now you look at this, and this is a much different picture than the way America was politically when I was studying in graduate school back in the 1960s and 70s, because the highly educated tended to be upscale. They tended to be more Republican. Women and men voted the same way pretty much across the board, and for all practical purposes, only 10% of the country was non-white, and most of those were African American. And so the country was a very different place in the past. And this is being reflected in American politics. Again, blue for Democrat, red for Republican, and independent voting. You can see what has happened over the course of time as young voters have become, and again, these are different generations. From the very beginning of the chart in the 1970s, those were baby boomers, moved through Generation X, and from about 2004 to 2008 and 12, they were millennials. But you can see the blue line, the difference between the blue line and the red line. It was fairly even at points in history during the Reagan years. In fact, there were young voters who were boomers and Gen Xers were more likely to vote Republican. Now they're moving toward the Democratic Party. Obviously, ethnic minorities are again moving in that same direction over the same period of time. Women who used to be, if anything, more Republican than Democratic have moved again, you can see, in a Democratic direction during that particular period of time. Women also comprise a clear majority of the electorate. About 54% of those who voted in November 2012 were women. Again, when I was studying back in grad school, it was even, and maybe even men were more likely to be the majority of the electorate. The Northeast and West have moved in a Democratic direction during the same period of time, as you can see. And college graduates, once a bulwark of upscale republicanism, again, particularly the most highly educated postgraduates, have moved in a Democratic direction during this same period. And so what we see is a new Democratic majority. This is party identification during this particular period. You can see as recently as 2004, there were an even number of Republican and Democratic identifiers within the electorate. Over time, the Democrats have come to be the majority party, at least in terms of those who identify or lean to a party. And this is Pew data, but the Democrats by 2012 had about a 50% to 38% advantage in Party AD. Again, very different than what it was in previous years. This is all beginning to solidify. These are, again, the most recent Pew numbers. We're just looking at the groups that are most likely to be Democratic, but you can go across the board. Women, millennials, women, African Americans, and so on. And the blue bars, a majority of each of those groups, a clear majority of each of those groups are identifying as Democrats. Particularly true, we'll look at the millennials, 55 to 36 in those numbers, but it's the same for all of those groups. So it's not simply that they voted Democratic in 2008 or voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012, but they're actually beginning to solidify. They're beginning to think of themselves as Democrats. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Morley, and he can tell you some of the implications of all of this.
And Mike's point is an important one. I've got three implications that I want you to understand about these numbers. He's got all the data. When you download the book, it's only $5. You can see all the data in all its detail, because that's chapter 1. And the rest of the book is devoted to the implications, of which I want to talk about 3. First is where that leaves the two parties as they confront this new electorate. And we've taken the analysis framework that we used in our first book, the 4 M's of politics, and we've tried to capture that in this set of slides, in this one slide rather, about the two parties. So despite everybody's, concerns about the Citizens United decision, Democrats and Republicans had rough parity in the amount of money they spent in 2012, now at the presidential level. Now, the Obama campaign, in ways we detail in the book, actually spent their money more effectively, but in point of fact, there was an equal amount of money out there to spend. So that particular fear never got realized, and we don't really see any likelihood going forward that one party or the other will gain a significant financial advantage over the other. Each has their own set of fundraising techniques, each has their own loyal supporters, and we don't see in the near or even medium term that changing very much. When you look at media, of course, we include the use of technology, the stuff that Simon first tried to bring to the attention of the Democratic Party, that media is not ads on television. It's a whole range of things. It includes identifying and micro-targeting voters today using big databases, but it also obviously includes using all of that data in every way you can think of to communicate a message, whether it's social media, traditional media, or any other way. And here, we don't dwell too much on it in the book because it's so well documented, but we provide some real hard numbers on just what kind of an advantage the Obama campaign created, and that juggernaut of a ground game that nobody'd ever seen anything like it. And of course, they're trying to now bring that into the legislative and policy arena with OFA. But in terms of campaign understandings, even the Republicans' report, the Rand's previous Growth and Opportunity report, was quick to condemn the technological disadvantage the Republicans operated on and the state of the art that they had in the 2012 election compared to the Democrats. However, on that one, we would not predict that that difference would last because it has never done so in political history. At one point, the Democrats had a lead on television, 1960 Kennedy Nixon debates, and by 1968, Nixon was the genius on television. And Republicans owned television campaigning from then on until very recently. And if you go back in time, there's all of these, one party starts with the advantage, but the other party catches up and in many cases surpasses. So that's a temporary advantage as opposed to a permanent advantage. We can spend a lot of time having fun speculating on the messenger side of this chart, but there is a reason to give the Republicans an equal sign, and that is they do have a diversity of candidates, particularly at the state level amongst their governors and the different people vying for the nomination. And there's a diversity not only in terms of ethnic and racial backgrounds, but there's a diversity of points of view. And so even though we would look over there and say they ain't got anybody as good as our folks, actually they got a pretty good set of candidates that could, one of them or more than one of them, could figure out what to do and become competitive in the course of the next couple of years. We gave, however, the Democrats a plus, not just because of the quality of the candidates as they currently exist, but because of the unity of belief that the Democrats have about their candidate. So assuming that many of you believe that Hillary is a consensus candidate, there's no such thing in the history of the Democratic Party. It's a wonderful idea, but we have never gone into an open election saying, okay, well, that person is going to have it, and have 60, 70% of the party agree with that. That's just like, that's what the Republicans used to do. And it's a very big plus for the Democrats. That's the plus on this chart. It's not about the specific messenger, but about the fact that Democrats know what to look for in a messenger and are pretty much in agreement on who that messenger ought to be. But that could turn out to be different. After all, Clinton didn't win the 2008 primary, so it's pretty hard to predict messengers that far in advance. On the other hand, the real issue here is message. I mean, you can talk about those other issues, and the Republican report to themselves only talks about the first three issues and tries to fix the rules in order to get the right kind of candidate nominated. Take it from me, who ran the Winograd Commission on Rules, that doesn't work. And so, you know, there's all that stuff, right? But message, now that's a challenge for the Republican Party. That's why we gave it a minus on this chart versus the plus on the Democratic side. Republicans understand they have a demographic challenge in the coalitions that Mike just described. They don't understand how deep their message offends the millennial majority coalition because of its lack of tolerance. And in the book, we talk about how much their dilemma reminds Mike and I, and I'm sure Simon, of the dilemma the Democratic Party found itself in the 70s and into the 80s, where it was very clear that where the base of our party wanted us to go, and it was very clear what that ideology was, and people were punished for not sticking with the ideology or passing litmus tests, as we used to call them. And we had a nominee in 1988 in Dukakis who, in order to not have fights over the ideology, we said his recommendation on why he should be president was his competency. And our friend Governor Blanchard, who was in chair of the platform committee in 1988, was told not to say anything in the platform. that could possibly upset anybody, right? So there wasn't a very long platform statement. We got Ted Sorensen to write it so that it sounded good, but didn't say anything. And all of that, of course, came crashing down when a group of Democrats said, no, the only way we're ever going to return to power is to modernize our message and deliver our ideals in a different way. And that organization was called the Democratic Leadership Council. It had a guy named Bill Clinton as its chair, fortuitously. And I helped write the marketing plan for that organization, which was, let's use public funds to get these ideas out, because it'll never win in the Democratic primary. And crazy idea, but we got a guy who wants to run on him in '92, and he hadn't got any money, so let's use public financing. That'll be, and then the guy won. And then there was nothing in the plan to say what to do, and we had some problems with that. So we had to go through a gut-wrenching process as a part of a party. There are still people who are mad at the DLC. Howard Dean ran against the DLC in 2004. The DLC no longer exists, but the NDN does. And that's because all of that's history in the political world. It has nothing to do with the coalition we're talking about. Republicans need their own DLC. They need a group of people to stand up to the message mavens and arbiters of what's an acceptable Republican message and say, nope, we're going to give you a different one. And you may not like it, but the public will. Keep in mind, in terms of short, medium, long term, it took the Democratic Party about 2 decades to get there, from 68 to 88, to, or if you prefer, 72 to 92, to 92. It's about 2 decades. And that's the road that the Republicans have to start down, and they haven't begun to start down it. They're still where we were, fixing technology and rules and all that sort of stuff, and saying the message is fine, we just didn't communicate it well. I can show you the reports and the language on that. So that's how we see the coalitions impacting the two parties. That's one implication. There's a second implication, which is about the president, and we devote a chapter about that in the book. There is a fantastic presidential scholar named Steve Skowronek at Yale, who's written about presidential leadership and created this notion, in political science literature anyway, of a concept called political time, which says that not every president is elected in a political environment in which they can be a transformative, great president. In fact, he identifies only 5 presidents in the nation's history who have had that opportunity and successfully pulled it off. And that would be Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, FDR, and Reagan. And what all of those 5 presidents did was they got elected in an election that repudiated the prior regime, not just the prior candidate, but the whole notion, the whole political concept, what we would call a civic ethos, the fundamental ideas about government and what government should do, were repudiated in the election of one of those presidents. So that gives you the political opportunity or political time to be a reconstructive, or as Skowronek would say, or transformative, as most people would say, president. And there's no question that Obama got elected in such a political time. 2008 was a repudiation of the George Bush years, and in fact, all of the Reagan stuff, and the notion that government's a bad thing and we have to lower taxes. All of that was repudiated, along with foreign policy and a whole host of other things, in 2008. The question that we debate in the book is whether or not Obama will be successful in taking advantage of that political time. And Skowronek lays out some criteria about that, and it has nothing to do with popularity, and it has little to do with legislative accomplishments, although you obviously need some to have an enduring legacy. What it has to do with is what you do to your party and the opposing party, and how far you take it in realigning that party and the opponent's party in response to a shift in public opinion that is registered by that repudiating election. So when John Boehner says that President Obama is out to annihilate the Republican Party, he's right in the sense that President Obama is deliberately seeking to reorder the political interests of this country and make the Republican idea, the central concepts, its whole rationale for lower taxes, lower spending, less government, an idea that has no support in public opinion. And of course, the greatest Reconstructive president, Lincoln, is famous for his statement about how important public opinion is, that it's much more important than passing legislation or changing the structure of government, because without public sentiment on your side, you have nothing. And therefore, he suggests that he who molds public opinion is the most important person in the political arena. And he was absolutely right. And so a lot of what you heard in the 2012 campaign, which the Republicans were just annoyed like hell about, was it's you know, what the Republicans want to do, what the Tea Party in 2010 and what the folks before that in Bush's land did, is the wrong idea. It's not just not working, it's the wrong idea. And so he can go to the National Correspondents' Dinner and he can put up a slide that points to his presidential library after Bush is opened, and the slide of his library is an arrow saying his fault, right, pointing to Bush. That's about becoming a transformative Reconstructive president. But it's not enough to undermine the public's belief in the other party's ideas. You have to also get your party to believe your ideas, which is oftentimes much harder. Even though you're the president of the United States, there's a series of people in states and in legislatures and in the Congress who have their own concept of what the Democratic Party coalition is, what the right issues are, what the ideas should be, and how to approach them. And managing the movement of all of that into a consensus on what it ought to be is an extraordinarily challenging task. FDR accomplished it. Reagan accomplished it in recent modern times. That's why so many people say, you know, I didn't leave the Republican Party left me, right? Well, there were Democrats who said that, including the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, about FDR, who actually voted for FDR's opponent in 1936, right? This is what OFA is about, and this is what a lot of the current tensions in the Democratic Party across the branches of government and inside the party are also about. And it'll be interesting to see whether he's successful. We argue back and forth on the OFA question in the book, but we really won't know the answer until we are done with the 2016 election. If the person who's elected president in 2016 is considered someone who is actually running on a third term for the Obama administration, with those ideas and that program updated and put in the context of that person's individual beliefs, then Obama will be able to lay claim with historians as having been a Reconstructive president. If, on the other hand, whether it's a Democrat or Republican gets elected as a repudiation of the Obama years, then he missed the opportunity. That's an open question. Okay, last, and then we'll get into the Brownstein stuff. First of all, keep in mind that this is all important because more than one out of three millennial voters will be, out of three American voters will be millennials by 2020. We've only got 2 more elections before they're all adults. And so what they believe in becomes the fundamental core of what the new civic ethos of this country is about. Not just the Democratic Party, but the country, right? And that's what happened with the GI generation in the 30s, and it's what happened with the Republican Party in the 1860s, and with the Jefferson-Jackson debate. Because about every 80 years, as you heard from our second book, America tears itself apart over the question of what is the role and purpose of government. What should our civic ethos be? And you can go that way or you can go this way, as the slide illustrates, but you have to make a decision because America is a complex political idea that believes in both a collective community force in our politics and strongly believes in individual liberty and responsibility. And how you find a synthesis is the challenge. We argue that the synthesis, and it's the last chapter of the book, will be as distinct and different as the New Deal was from what preceded it, but it will not be a second coming of the New Deal. It will be a millennial approach to how you put those two things together. And it doesn't have a name yet. You could call it a new federalism because it envisions a parent-like role for the federal government in laying down guidelines like thou shalt buy health insurance. But it doesn't envision a creation of a bureaucracy to enforce those guidelines. And it much more relies on local action and state level and community level actors to provide the infrastructure that enables individuals to abide by the new guidelines. That's sort of what we think it will look like, and it'll be a new synthesis of individual freedom and collective action. It will have both collaboration and individual empowerment as a way of making those strands of America's political DNA come together. And we think this will happen just as sure as we were that the Democratic coalition would coalesce and deliver President Obama a victory. So that's what we conclude the book with, and we hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much. Now Ron is going to challenge everything we said, right? Okay.
So, thank you. Well, very grateful for the opportunity to talk politics with two of my favorite observers of politics. But I want to start with a question I'm sure many people in the audience have, and in general people in the political world have when we talk about generational theory. And that is the question of how lasting are these attachments? I mean, you have this debate among the political scientists about to what extent generations are shaped as kind of a cohort, and to what extent they are influenced by where they are in their life cycle. So I just want to ask you kind of where you come down on that. To what extent are the strong preferences that Democrats have seen in the last two elections, 67% of 18 to 29-year-olds in 08, 60% in 2012, to what extent is that sustainable, and to what extent is it at risk simply through the process of life cycle?
Well, that's a good question, Ron. Generally, the belief among political scientists, those who study voting behavior, is that during the formative years, politically, which would be roughly 18 to 24, 18 to 26, as people, years old, right, as people start to formulate their beliefs and in this instance, identifications, and in effect vote a particular way for a couple of election cycles, 2 or 3 election cycles, that once that happens, those beliefs, those identifications remain in force pretty much for a lifetime. And so the most important chart that I showed, talking about what Morley talked about, was that very last one where we looked at party identification. Because I think that is beginning to talk about a hardening, a solidification. It isn't simply that, well, I voted for Obama in 2008, I voted for him in 2012. It is that I'm beginning to think of myself as a Democrat or a Republican. And so the fact that about 55% of millennials now think of themselves as Democrats and roughly 35 to 38% as Republicans would suggest that this is on the verge of being a possibility of lasting for a lifetime. And we saw that, we see it with pretty much any generation, but the GI generation, the World War II Roosevelt generation, voted overwhelmingly for FDR in 32, 36, but remained that way. They remained Democrats for the entirety of their lives. Grover Norquist, for example, talking about how as this generation died off, it wasn't merely that the greatest generation people were dying off, but in his way of reckoning, Democrats were dying. And so I think that it is close to being able to happen for the Democratic Party.
You know, Morley, as Mike says, it's close to being able to happen to solidify this loyalty. There are many who kind of look at this and feel that this Democratic advantage is to some extent defying gravity, in that the president is running so well among these young voters, even as they are being hammered in the economy. I mean, unemployment has been double digits among these younger workers every month of his presidency. For that matter, double digits among Hispanics every month of his presidency. And you have some, you mentioned Roy Teixeira before, be among those who worry that it is simply not sustainable to hold those kind of elevated levels of support unless you preside over an economy that actually delivers more to these voters. Do you think, how big a threat is that economic situation to what Mike describes as solidifying loyalty?
I think President Obama and the Democrats have been given an enormous grace period by Republicans' incompetence. By having the Republican Party insist upon staying with a relatively intolerant approach to almost every social issue, even as the country has moved dramatically to the different place, whether it's gay marriage or abortion or legalization of marijuana or immigration, you name it, right? they've always been standing in the path of that change and objecting. And so whether there is an economic message that could get through to this majority and convince them that there's an alternative that's better coming from the Republican Party has never really happened, because it never gets past the "these people don't like us" message, and that's the end of the conversation. Now, having begun that lovely grace period for so long, the question you're asking is, how long will that last, right? And in the book, we talk about these two views of America's economic future. One is by the co-authors of the original, one of the co-authors of the original books on generations, Neil Howe, who speculates that every time we have this kind of generation, America experiences an economic winter, and it's a really bad thing. And all saying, well, we had that winter, we're already in spring, right? Well, he's actually suggesting it gets worse. And
Sort of like Game of Thrones.
Yes,
winter,
exactly.
Yes,
and if he's right, then I think the Democrats are very much threatened. On the other hand, we quote a number of economists who have noted that energy prices are dropping, inflation is under control, manufacturing jobs are coming back, the housing industry is here, and it's quite possible that Obama will preside, despite the Congress's interference, over an economic boom, maybe a mini boom, over the next couple of years in 2014 and 2015. If that happens, the Republicans have no chance.
But your view is you think there is a time limit here. In other words, there is a point where if there are not more material improvement for the generation.
It's not so much a time limit as a window of opportunity that the Republicans have given us. And they could end that window if they ever change their message. Now, we don't think they will in the near term. But should they do so, then the economy could be a real debate.
So what does, at this point, if it's not, if it's not kind of, doing well in the economy that is annealing this generation to the Democrats, what is it fundamentally shared cultural values at this point? Is it fundamentally that?
Yeah, I think that is a huge part of it, because it's very difficult for the Republicans, as Morley said, to get a hearing on the economic possibilities if millennials, who again are 40% non-white, who have put 70% support gay marriage at this point.
1 out of 5 have an immigrant parent.
And 1 out of 5 have an immigrant parent. It's a generation that is driven by women in terms of college and jobs and so on. And if the Republican message to them that is coming through, we really don't like you very much because we don't like the way you look, we don't like your parents, we don't like your lifestyle, all of that sort of thing, then it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans to get their message.
In some ways, it feels as though, since we have a Michigan convention here, it's especially relevant, that Democrats now are experiencing in reverse what Republicans did with their gains among blue-collar whites in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there were entire books written, What's the Matter with Kansas, arguing that Republicans were bamboozling white working-class America into supporting them on cultural issues without really delivering for them economically. And you could make a case that for big portions of the Democratic coalition, particularly minorities and millennials, the overlap there, that the reverse is happening.
Well, and you ought to write a column about that.
Yeah, I might have.
And it's absolutely the issue here is that there is a values difference that's driving politics, not an economic one. And for so many of us who grew up thinking politics was economics, it ain't true.
Yeah. So is there at all a warning sign for Democrats about what we're talking about in here, that even though the overall number didn't drop, it dropped a little bit, 67 to 60, among white millennials, Obama dropped 11 points from 08. He dropped from winning them at 55% down to 44%. So what's that? Is that at all a kind of a warning signal about the limits of cultural affinity without economic payoff?
Well, Mike, you may want to answer. I want to quote a statistic that's in the book that I find startling every time I read it. So there was a candidate in 2012, to go to your question, who lost the male vote, the white vote, the married vote, and the Protestant vote. He's called President Obama, and he got reelected. Now, that says something about, it's more than just economics and values, it's demographics. And you have a set of voters who are so in tune with the message they heard from the president, not necessarily the performance, but certainly the message, that you're not going to move them by arguing that, you know, they shouldn't have modified the talking points on Benghazi. That's like the most dead-end conversation you could possibly have. And yet that's where that party is, rather than addressing their own inadequacy.
Right, and you made the point in one of your articles that Romney did better among white voters than any Republican ever has.
Challenger, yeah.
And he still lost. Even among millennials, which with the white millennial vote going toward Romney this time, that white millennial vote was still much higher than older white voters. So it may well be that there could be this threshold among white millennials that, as long as it doesn't fall too far, even if the Democratic candidates don't get a majority of that vote, if they get 40–45%, that will still be sufficient with the minority and female vote that and the votes of the rest of the millennial generation.
Just about up that point, Romney's vote among whites was better than Reagan's in 80, essentially equal to Eisenhower in 52 and Bush in 88. Is the best performance ever by a Republican challenger, and he lost pretty solidly.
And among voters over the age of 30, he won.
Yeah.
Without the millennial vote, he wins.
Okay, but here's one of the challenges I want to ask you about. One of the other challenges for Democrats, and then we'll sort of talk about some of the other ways millennials may be changing the party and the country. But the other challenge, as we mentioned, you know, in 2012, Mitt Romney won 59% of white voters and lost pretty badly. In 2010, Republicans won 60% of white voters and had the best midterm for either party since 1938, which is really just a measure of underscoring how different the electorates have become in the off year and the presidential year. The youth share of the vote, I think, was down 6 points from 2008 to 2010. Older whites were a much bigger share of the electorate, and they are voting 60% plus Republican. So as you look forward, you know, one challenge of this new coalition that you identify is that it is something of a boom and bust coalition for Democrats. Is there a kind of an identifiable pathway toward turning them out in midterm elections at anything like the rate they vote in presidential years?
Well, I think the whole political rationale, maybe not the only rationale, but the political rationale behind OFA is that point you just made. We need to keep the turnout machine intact. We need to keep it well-oiled. We need to keep it greased. We need to keep it active, because if we don't turn out those same voters in 2014, not only will the House stay Republican, but the Senate is likely to turn Republican. And that would really make the final 2 years of the Obama administration a lame duck administration. By the way, I would want to quickly add, because that might happen and Obama might be a, quote, lame duck president in those final 2 years, has nothing to do with his opportunity to be a transformative president. He doesn't have to pass any more legislation to be a transformative president. He has to change his party, and he has to change the other party, or cause the party to want to change on the other side. And so that is all possible, and I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's a big problem over time, because as those numbers keep growing on the millennials, even a fall off in turnout isn't quite as disaster, but certainly in 2014, I think it's still an issue. It's
still an issue, and it may be for a few more election cycles. But you know, as the population changes, if the Republicans don't get in and change that party identification number, then even if there is fall off in those votes, there'll still be enough of them to do well for the Democrats. I agree with you, 2014, like 2010, is going to be a problem. Maybe even 2018 could be a problem. But beyond that, I think it's still a matter of Republicans needing a message to win millennial votes, to really break into that coalition.
And the flip side of what we're talking about is the risk for Republicans is taking a false positive from a good 2014.
They did
as
already.
they did from 2010.
They did
right? I mean, that you kind of look at this and say, all right, we just won, 63 House seats.
And those people are never going to vote again. Whoever voted in 08 from the Republican perspective wasn't going to vote again.
Right, and in fact, it was the way they structured their polling in the 2012 campaign. 2008 was the anomaly year. And everything was going to look like 2010 or 2004. That was what the electorate would be. And so they did their skewed polling to try to prove that, and it didn't happen in 2012.
All right, so let's talk about a little bit about how this generational and coalitional change is and is not changing, affecting the Democratic Party? Because you mentioned Stephen Skoranik's great work about political time. So answer the question: to what extent do you see Obama? To what extent has Obama changed his party at this point, and where? What issues?
Well, first of all, he's changed his own. He evolved on gay marriage, and now you have, I think, only 2 Democratic senators saying they're not in favor of gay marriage. That's quite a shift. On immigration, I don't think he has re-energized the party's inclination to be in favor of immigration, but I don't think without him, the labor interests in seeing immigration pass would have been so clear, given the tensions it creates amongst its own members. So as you go and you think about, okay, on issues, has he moved his coalition to a place that's more in line with this millennial majority coalition? I would say yes. They tend to be on the very social issues that we talk about as the current defining difference between the 2 parties. He did, in his policy positions in the course of 2012, he did take on formerly powerful interest groups in the Democratic Party and go a different way.
Right. Now, I would argue, I mean, I have written, I believe that he has kind of crossed a Rubicon.
Yes, that's the right way of thinking about it.
That he, on a variety of issues, including contraception, DREAM Act, gay marriage, now gun control, potentially climate, he has taken positions that mobilize the new coalition, even at the danger of further alienating the blue-collar and older whites who are the cornerstone of the old coalition.
With a clear perspective that that's what he was doing.
Right, but and showed that you could build a majority that way in a way that was not true even as recently as Bill Clinton. But can you build and sustain a congressional majority with that agenda?
Well, that's a good question, and because I think the one place, and I don't know if Morley will agree with me or not on this, but the one place where I don't know that it has happened yet is this, as we've defined it, the 21st century millennial economic view of, and so I think there's still, I think it's difficult for Democrats to not look back to the New Deal as very often the solution, the way to solve our problems is to create another bureaucracy. And I don't think that's the way millennials will go. I'm not sure that the current generation or current membership of Congress or political leadership is at that point yet either.
Not specifically about the leadership, but particularly in the House. There's much more polarization and rigid ideological positioning on both sides than there is than this coalition would be happy about. In the Senate, you get some mitigating because of the broad nature of many of the state's electorates.
I want to bring the audience in for questions in a few minutes, but let me ask you, sticking to that point, one area where I wonder whether Democrats have confronted the realities of the new coalition is on this question of restraining entitlements and the impact of entitlements on other public spending. We are in a situation where the federal government is now spending $7 per capita on seniors for every dollar it spends per capita on kids. You have transfer payments rising to 2/3 of the budget, investment shrinking over the past generation. Is that sustainable at a time when Democrats are now losing over 60% of white seniors and relying overwhelmingly on these votes of the younger millennials who would benefit from some of those programs that may potentially be squeezed by the growth of entitlements?
I think you were the one who pointed out so clearly that both parties have got a mistaken identity, a mistaken view of who their constituencies are when it comes to entitlements, right? Because everybody, all the old people vote Republican, and the Republicans say we ought to change entitlements, and the Democrats say we can't change entitlements, and they're not getting any votes from old people. So if in fact it was a selfish electorate, as I think one of the presidential candidates implied, this would not be a good idea, right? But that isn't what the electorate's about. The electorate's about America and what's good for America. It's particularly true of millennials. They're not interested in starting an intergenerational warfare over it. They don't, as some people have so crazily suggested, need an association of young people to compete with AARP. That's not how millennials think about the world. They love their parents. They're not into confrontation. They're looking for pragmatic solutions that will fix the problem. That's why so many of them are so wild about Obamacare and so much in favor of it, because it looks like a pragmatic answer to part of the problem. And I think, again, the Democratic interest groups and some of its leadership are locked into these notions of what is an acceptable public policy position on entitlements. It's very clear Obama's not, and it's very clear that he's not because he sees room to move in this coalition.
Or so are you saying, do you think within this coalition, Mike Morley, that ultimately Democratic Obama or a successor will move to constrain entitlements in some ways, in part to open up more potential spending on programs for the next generation?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it will, it will be programs that are going to benefit younger people, but also in the long run have to benefit America that way, because it isn't simply college loans or helping people to pay for college or something like that. It's infrastructure. It's a whole series of things that are going to need to be invested, but I think this is the toughest nut for the Democratic Party to crack, is to try to get out of the kind of the New Deal mentality, as it were.
Let me ask you one final question and then turn it over to you guys for some questions from the audience, and then reserve one or two at the end. So gay marriage is the issue.
Thought you were done. Go ahead.
No. Gay marriage is the issue where I think we almost clearly recognize that millennials are rapidly changing the political dynamic. One reason the polling is changing so fast is not only because older people are changing their mind, it's because more millennials are being counted as adults, and they are 70% in favor. We potentially could have 3 states legalize gay marriage this month. Delaware, Minnesota, and Illinois. I mean, just incredible movement. Okay, what else? Look into your crystal ball. What other issues will the rise of when millennials are a third or more of the electorate, what other issues are going to rapidly change over the next few years,
I don't think we're going to maintain our current system of financing higher education. I think higher education is going to end up historically the way high school education ended up in the 20th century and primary school ended up in the 19th century. It's going to be free if you go to a public university, because that's what America has always done. It's always decided that this nice, wonderful young generation is needed in new economic ways in our society, and the only way to get them prepared for that and for the country to benefit is to give them the education they need to be economically successful. We've never asked a civic generation like millennials or any other generation after that particular civic generation to finance the education on its own that the country actually needs. So I think when millennials are in power and growing as a part of the electorate, the current system of financing student college education by creating enormous debt burdens is going to go away, and I think the leading edge proponents of having it go away is going to be the home building industry, because they're going to need a new set of customers who can afford to buy a house.
And I think beyond that, if it doesn't happen before then, it will certainly happen when millennials are running things, and it is immigration. That will have to be eventually put behind us, if only because millennials are so diverse. And what we have found historically is that when civic type generations like the millennials have run things, that's when we've gotten rid of a lot of the restrictive immigration laws. And so I would, such as in the 1964-65 Reform Act, and which was driven by the GI generation, heavily also children of immigrants. And so I would think that will be an issue that will be resolved once and for all.
All right, questions for you guys over here.
Yeah, following up on that, do you see any difference in the way millennials see foreign policy, and particularly?
Millennials,
If you go to our website and click on the new video, he talks about this. Go ahead.
I don't know, what did I say? No, millennials tend to have because they tend to be very group-oriented, they tend to try to resolve problems by discussing among themselves, by trying to come up with win-win solutions that essentially benefit the entire group. So millennials tend to be very much in favor of a multilateral type of foreign policy, form alliances, not the U.S. going it alone in a unilateral way.
Lead from behind.
With respect to the defense, being more making machinery focus, as well as just our diplomatic efforts.
Yes, but don't assume that therefore millennials are in some way a new dovish part of the electorate, because they're not. They're very concerned about their safety and security. They've been scarred by 9/11 and the whole living in an era of terror where they have to go through mag readers to get into their schools. I mean, they understand the need for security, and of course they make great military people. That's most of our military forces are millennials today, and most civic generations have been great fighters. So it's not going to be a dovish foreign policy, but it will be a multilateral U.S. as a member of a team kind of foreign policy, but it's still going to go after bad guys.
Just one of my favorite things, when you ask millennials who their 10 ideal employers would be, and some of them are technological, as you'd expect, Google, companies like that, but a lot of government service and 2 government agencies that are on the list. One would be the State Department, that's the one side, the diplomacy side. Another would be the CIA.
And the FBI.
And the FBI,
Yeah.
which you would not, I mean, boomers could never have possibly said that back in the 1960s.
I can attest that my millennial second lieutenant son is
There you go, there you go.
in the back.
Sorry to touch on it just slightly. Where do you think that the millennials come down on as far as gun control? How are they going to shape the conversation?
Well, I'll let Mike speak to the data on gun control because I can never quite get it in my head. But if you think about setting rules that make the place safer, then you're going to get a sympathetic ear with millennials. If you suggest that you're going to do that by taking hostile action towards law-abiding citizens, you're not going to get millennial support. And we haven't really found, although a lot of people were hopeful that background checks would be a place, we haven't really found the common ground in that debate that would satisfy a millennial yet.
Which is true, but you know, in a general sense, if you go gun control pro or con, actually we wrote an article for National Journal about Obama's electoral coalition becoming his policy coalition, and the first issue where this came up tragically by happenstance was after Newtown, the Newtown killings, is that all of the groups, including millennials within the Democratic electoral coalition, were those that were supporting enhanced gun control. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was essentially when Pew asked the question, do you come down more in favor of protecting gun rights or more in favor of controlling gun ownership, something like that. Millennials were, again, as they tend to be on almost everything, about 55% for
Right.
gun control and 35% for gun.
I
But
think
note
all-
the distinction there, that's 55, it's unity of belief, but it's not 75
Right.
like it is on gay
Like
marriage.
on gay
It's
Right,
not
it's different.
two-thirds like it is
There-
on abortion.
Millennials tilt toward gun control,
Right.
not as dramatically as they do toward gay marriage, and not as dramatically as the other key elements of the Obama coalition. If you look at minorities and the college-plus white women, who I focus on more than the single, but if you put it
Right.
either single, they are at 2/3 and 75% on the gun control side. And the millennials are slightly there, but not nearly as much as the other.
And would
key
you mind
components.
calling on that millennial in the back?
Sure.
Introduce yourself and promote your book.
So, quick question.
No, really, say who you are.
I'm David Burstein. I wrote another book about millennials, which you can probably buy. You can actually buy on Amazon. You can buy both of our books as a comic
And what is the name of that book?
called Fast Future.
And it's a great book.
So, quick question for you. So, when you think about, obviously, a lot of the emphasis is putting on Democrats. So, what are the things? What are the 3 things that Democrats could do wrong and to lose millennial voters? What are the 3 things Republicans could do right to win them back?
Which one do you want to take, Dems or Republicans?
Well, I don't know that because I'm not sure I can come up with 3 because I think in the end it comes down to messaging. And I think if the Democrats, either party adopts the wrong message to appeal to this coalition, to appeal to the new demographics of America, then they will lose. The one that does the best job will win. I think for the Republicans, it's obviously the most difficult because they haven't figured out a way of doing it in any election. They haven't done it yet. For the Democrats, though, I think it would be either going back to a previous era, and it really is what it is, and it could be the most recent previous era, the kind of the 1990s Clinton approach of kind of triangulation. That's the way we got to do it. We got to appeal to independence. We've got to do it that way. Or it could go even further back to the New Deal solution to problems. Let's create another bureaucracy to solve problems. I think that's where the Democrats' problem is.
A couple of years ago, Mike wrote a blog, we both wrote it, but Mike wrote it, for NDN, and the title of it was Use It or Lose It, and I think that's the key thing for the Democrats. They have to make use of the coalition they have. They have to keep pushing the edges of that of the public policy implications that coalition gives them the power to do. And if they use it, they won't lose it. And if they don't use it, they will lose it. I think that's the Democrats. And as we talked about on the Republicans, you know, they don't change their message. They're just dead in the water for a long time.
You were waiting.
As a follow-up to that, I would ask, as a millennial who has not written a book, so what does this millennial pressure do for centrist Republicans who can speak to the social issues of millennials but conservative issues economically, and the Tea Party Republicans? What does this do in the short term and long term for those two groups?
Well, I think, actually, it's a great question, because I think that centrist Republicans, and there are young Republicans like Kristen Soltis, who clearly recognize, she wrote a really brilliant article a week or so ago in which there was the talk about whether there was a decline in millennial turnout or not. And she said, well, yeah, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. She went into a lot of methodological issues and then essentially dismissed them and said, but the Republicans' real problem is with those who vote, how are they voting? And if we don't change our message, we're in real trouble. So I think that centrist Republicans, it depends on on what issue you're talking about, what you mean centrist. But if at least it means a sense, which is where she's coming, of tolerance on the social issues, on gay marriage, immigration, things of that nature, that I think that is the direction for probably the most fruitful direction for the Republican Party. In terms of the kind of Tea Party, Tea Party is a fascinating movement because when it first started, everybody thought there was a bunch of libertarians and so on. Actually, it tended to be pretty much a fair, large group of Christian conservatives, of evangelicals more than anything else. But if you're talking about a real libertarian point of view, I mean, there is a side of millennials, like any generation, that might go in that direction. But I don't think millennials, data doesn't suggest, are a libertarian group. In fact, if anything, they tend to be very group-oriented and so on.
One is that I think you're already seeing some subtle movement, some gravitational pull. It was striking that during the Supreme Court hearings, arguments on gay marriage, that the dominant Republican response was let the states decide, don't set a national rule, which was a repudiation, an end, really, of the federal marriage amendment. Mitt Romney ran on a federal constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage in every state, and that has quietly been now, deep six. There's no Rubio, Rand Paul. But having said that, the challenge Republicans have is, as I like to say, the future does not have a seat at the table. The potential future coalition is not involved in the current selection of its nominees and positions. Over 60% of Republican voters in the 2012 primaries were over 50 on a national basis, right? So, and over 90% were white, 93% were white. Even in heavily non-white states like Arizona and Nevada, almost 90% of the primary voters are white. So you basically have an older white primary electorate selecting these nominees, and they have a very different set of priorities than what you might pursue to, reach out to this emerging constituency.
Right.
That's a challenge.
So you sort of have the flip side of Grover Norquist's comment about GI generation.
Right.
The
And actually,
Tea Party Republicans are dying every day.
it's not only older and whiter, but it is conservative. It is ideological. When you ask people what their ideology is, Democrats are roughly evenly divided between liberals and moderates, and Republicans are, I think, by 2/3 are conservative. 80-20 now? Yeah, it's even
And
more.
45% of the total primary voters were evangelical Christians. So it's a big gravitational pull.
I have a question that kind of goes to what Ron was asking about. If Obama doesn't deliver on the economy, what happens? I have a sense that the millennials have really low expectations about the economy, and that they've, for better or worse, they're not pushing for higher minimum wage, they're not pushing for full-time jobs, they're not pushing for some sort of financial security that their parents had. Why is that? What's going on?
Well, first of all, they're not pushy. Let's start with the first reason. They're not pushy. They're nice. Second of all, they're not confrontational, so they're not going to engage in that kind of street warfare that you might have expected from older generations faced with the same dilemma. And as one millennial said to me over dinner last night, I'm so tired of being asked why I'm still optimistic in the face of all this economic difficulty. The reason is because I don't intend to let that stay. I'm going to get in there and fix it. That's why I'm optimistic. So when you suggest that, well, you know, come on, get going, they're saying, well, get out of our way. We'll fix it, but just get out of our way. And that's a different attitude. They'll do it together locally. That's their ideology about how to
In
do
fact, they're not very ideological. It's very
Right.
pragmatic. And I don't know you know, there will be this new civic ethos they will create. It will be, again, it's very different. You know, we're talking about this whole New Deal thing and how it's going to be different. I have trouble, as a person almost 70 years old, grasping that the New Deal isn't the way to do it. But millennials will come up with something entirely different, entirely new, that I'm not sure I can conceive of it at this point. I'm not sure I'll be around when it all happens.
We've got time for
But-
two more questions, and then we can convene for further. In the back one,
I have one just building on that. Why do you think they would say, given those attitudes about the economy, and they obviously did bring a fair amount of political energy to the gay rights question, why are they so invested in that, which affects a much smaller number of them than the economic?
I don't think they hear an economic message they believe that will be effective. I think they believe it's going to be fixed locally. You know, we'll shop locally, we'll take care of each other, we'll do it at the local basis. Federal government, yeah, we would love to them and give us the education we need, give us the infrastructure we need, particularly if it's technologically sophisticated. But after that, parents get out of the way, we'll figure this out on our own.
let's try to squeeze in the last, everybody had their hand up, and quick answers, and so you have four more. So
Oh, four more, quick, okay.
Assuming the next Democratic nominee for president is not African American, I was wondering whether you have any data about the white millennials and whether there is any either explicit or implicit racial prejudice, and to the extent that that exists even among the millennials, and certainly exists in other parts of the population, isn't the next Democrat going to get another 5% of the vote compared to Obama?
By not being black?
By not being black, yeah.
We talk in very broad terms about generations, and quite obviously, you know, this isn't astrology or anything like that. It isn't that somebody's born under the sign of millennial and they all think and act the same way. That is clearly not the case. So these are generalizations or tendencies. So yes, I'm sure there is racial prejudice among millennials, but even certainly among white millennials. But it is less than for their parents and for their grandparents. They're just simply not as focused on that. Whether that is going to, you know, you could argue the other way, that maybe not as many African Americans will turn out at the polls if there is no African American candidate on the ballot. So I don't know. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference overall.
There's opportunity for growth, though, particularly among blue-collar women, where Obama was less than 40%. He won less than 40% blue-collar women. There is the potential there for some growth for Democrats over here.
Hi, Ari Ratner. I was an appointee in the State Department in the first Obama administration, and I was interested in what you said about the State Department being one of the places millennials want to work, in part because after working there, the dominant experience is disillusionment. Not with the mission.
These weren't millennials who'd worked there. These were aspirational millennials.
But as a broader thing, the mission of sort of what you think about when you say government, the mission is shared. The disillusionment with the institutions of government is very palpable, and particularly as they get older over time and come to experience it firsthand. I mean, part of it's just a coming of age thing, but I think, you know, the sort of bureaucratic old systems,
Yeah.
you know, which Democrats defend in large part, is very much, you know, anti-millennial.
Yeah.
Gore had this whole reinventing government.
Yeah, I think I had something to do with that.
You were in charge of it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't do an introduction.
Under the radar, there's things going on, but Obama hasn't pushed any of that.
Right.
Rhetorically
Right.
or otherwise.
Right. So I spent yesterday the 20-year reunion of all those folks, and we got to hear Vice President Gore very eloquently state the case. And the fact of the matter is that of the 4 Ps of presidential leadership, politics, PR, policy, and performance, our current president has spent little or no attention to performance as on a day-to-day basis, as Vice President Gore did for Bill Clinton. On the other hand, Gore's the only one who ever did. There is no other record in the federal government of performance being important. And when I was working on performance for Bill Clinton, I rarely got called on in a staff meeting. It was just really an extra piece.
I just wonder if presidents generally have just figured that this particularly since the New Deal maybe, the bureaucracy is so big and so clunky that you just burn yourself out trying to do much.
On the other hand, and we want to get to the final 2 questions, the 8 millennials I was sitting at the dinner table with yesterday, all of whom work for a different branch of the federal government, right, and all of whom were dedicated Democrats, all had the same experience you just recounted. Total disillusionment with this place. Why are these people still working here? They can't even turn on an iPad. Get them out of here. So that's
In
going
the
to
back and then up here, that's all we got.
How do millennials distribute among existing House districts?
Oh, God, I don't know the answer to that question.
That's a great question.
You don't, do you, did any of you?
Offhand, I mean, the ACS is now available, so you can answer the question with an Excel sheet. But, you know, I think the distribution, by age is a little bit tilted toward the coasts, but not vastly. You know, I mean, the bigger division has been along racial lines, right? So like 4/5 of House Republicans are in districts that are more white than the national average. Almost two-thirds of Democrats are now in districts that are more non-white than the national average. Enormous sorting in the House along racial lines, but I don't know. I'm assuming the senior population is bigger in Republican districts because they're dominant now in the blue-collar, ex-urban, rural kind of districts. But I actually don't know on the. You think?
By larger margins in the same number of districts.
That's, yeah. Until redistricting, I think you're right.
Yeah.
The one last question.
Yeah. Well, it was Rick also.
Oh.
Go ahead. We'll do them both.
What's the general attitude of millennials towards taxes to pay for the services?
They're all in favor. 55% of millennials believe in bigger government with more services as opposed to fewer government, smaller government with less services.
A real quick ad. People ask if millennials will pay for the baby boom. It's the wrong question. The issue is, will the baby boom pay for the millennials?
Exactly.
And they don't want to at the moment.
Right.
Rick, no?
Kind of parallel to what we have.
Okay.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much, and thank these great.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
I want to just 2 closing comments, and I want to just build on something Jeff said, is that, you know, all old dog, new tricks, right? I mean, a lot of the work that we've been involved in recent years has been to give the Democratic operatives the courage to speak to the new electorate, right? And I mentioned in my opening comments that there was a major pollster in our party, who was not one of my favorite pollsters, who used the term drop-off voters. And it was so pejorative because, you know, Tip O'Neill said you can't expect somebody's vote unless you ask for it. And Democrats had never asked for the votes of Latinos and millennials, and so therefore they didn't perform. This got to the midterm question you guys were, you know, going through earlier. And what we learned of Latinos, which where there was more strategic intent in narrow places, from 2004 to 2008, the share of the electorate, and I'm just going to pick 4 states where we happen to run millions of dollars of ads, but in the 4 states, in Nevada, the Latino share increased by 50% in one election cycle. Colorado, 67%. New Mexico, 40%, right? Florida was only a slight uptick because in part there had been a lot of spending before. So what we saw was when the Democratic machine spoke to this new electorate with the same level of strategic intent that it did to other parts, turnout went way up, right? And so this isn't institutionalized yet in the congressional wing of the Democratic Party. And until it does, we're not going to know the answer to your question. I mean, in essence, the question you asked, which is an important one, which is there an alignment problem? And the answer is, you know, I think that the Democrats have to have the courage, as Ron pointed out, to recognize where their vote's coming from and make sure the policy matches, you know, where their coalition is now. There's a lot of distrust of Obama in the House and the Senate. You guys know this. And in part, I guess I'm quoted in your book saying he's ahead of the rest of the party on this. And so how the Obama team, and it's now the diaspora of the Obama campaign, can move and evangelize and move the rest of the party into understanding what they did is a huge question. And I would argue the Obama team has not invested enough in evangelizing about this new electorate inside the rest of the Democratic Party. And Ann remembers that in 2007, 2008, the person who did all the training for the state party executive directors was me, right? It wasn't Obama people, right? On the new electorate and how to speak to them. The second point I just want to make to finish is that the other thing Ron said tonight that I think is really important about the Republicans is that the new coalition doesn't have a seat at the table, right, or some version of that.
The future doesn't have.
The future doesn't have a, so one of the projects of this organization was to break up the Iowa-New Hampshire duopoly in the nomination process. And when I ran for chair of the party in 2005, one of my major campaign planks was breaking up the Iowa-New Hampshire duopoly and adding a southern state and a southwestern state. And that may have cost me the chairmanship because the New Hampshire guys ran a negative phone bank against me. That was the most brutal thing, claiming I was a DLC Democrat, by the way, and that was their argument against me. I know, and it actually had an impact in the electorate. But the point is that idea was then, I may have lost, but our argument won. And this organization is the godfather of adding the South Carolina and Nevada, primary, which put the future at the table for the Democrats. Because what was amazing was up until that point, no minority voters had a meaningful say in the Democratic nominating process. That changed in 2008. And that was a major reason why, one of the reasons that Obama won.
Well,
So
a lot of it turned, in fact, on South Carolina. Is that
South Carolina, and remember that our old boss, right, Bill Clinton, got a little caught up in some in unfortunate language about what was happening with the racial component of the South Carolina primary, right? I wouldn't have picked South Carolina as one of the southern states, but that's okay. But anyway, I just want to say this was an amazing conversation. I was riveted through the whole thing. Ron, thank you so much we know how busy you are. Mike and Morley, we hope this is a little bit of a lift to get this book out to your friends. All of you who have millennial friends or relatives, right, this is great summer reading. And certainly I think you should buy many copies of it for all of your millennial
Send
friends.
it to their Kindles because it's exclusively available on Amazon.
But yeah, there it is. And thanks everybody very much. We're going to stick around for a little bit more beer, wine, and food. But thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.